Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara.
I'm Lucy. From tomorrow, if you're a New South Wales resident aged 18 to 49 and you've been taking the contraceptive pill for 2 years, you'll be able to get it from a trained pharmacist without booking in to see your GP more than once a year. And New South Wales is not alone. Most of the country is now trialling similar approaches and extending it to other medications like treatments for UTIs and eczema. In today's deep dive, we'll explain what's driven this push to give pharmacists more power over everyday medications and what it means for you.
Okay, so Lucy, oral contraception, aka the pill, we're just going to call it the pill from here on in. It's been available to Aussies for 63 years now. So statistically, most of us really don't know what adult life is without the pill. And for most of that time, accessing the pill's been this matter of seeing the GP every so often and getting a script, then getting that script filled at the pharmacy. But that is now changing. Talk to me about it.
Yes, exactly. That is now changing across the country, but specifically from tomorrow in New South Wales. It's what I would call the biggest development in our relationship with the pill since it first went on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, the PBS, which subsidises medications. That happened in 1972. Before that, the pill was subject to a 30% luxury tax.
And I think good old luxury tax.
Exactly. What a luxury.
Not having a child, what a luxury.
Well, at that time, it really was a luxury. And I think that shows you how our relationship with the pill has changed, that it's become something that had a hefty luxury tax to something that is such a necessity that governments around the country are working to find ways to make it easier and less complicated and more straightforward and less of an issue to access is really what I'm trying to say. Less of a kind of a taking up less time out of our week, really. So from tomorrow, certain people in New South Wales, so if you're aged 18 to 49 and you've been taking the pill for 2 years, you'll only need to see your GP once a year to get your prescription renewed. And the rest of the time, pharmacists, those who carry out special training, can dispense it to you.
And so talk me through how this change came about because, you know, as you intimated earlier, there hasn't been that much change in this area for quite a while now. So how did this happen?
I'll talk about New South Wales specifically first and then we'll get to the rest of the country later. But the first we heard of this idea in New South Wales where we are is right before the state election last year. So February 2023, the then coalition government led by Dominic Perrottet made an election promise to trial allowing, quote, pharmacists to renew prescriptions for the contraceptive pill. So that's really the first we heard of it at this state level. The coalition did go on to lose that election, but the idea stuck around. And in September last year, the new government, the Labor government, announced almost 1,000 pharmacies were eligible to dispense the pill without a prescription to those aged 18 to 35, again with that same caveat of if you've been prescribed it in the last 2 years. Under that trial, which lasted a year, so September to September, where we are now, women only paid the cost of the medication. Okay, so they weren't paying any other costs, for example, that they would have been with a GP previously. What was the reasoning that the government gave for this trial? Because it's interesting that this is one of those moments where there does seem to be this bipartisan support. It was first floated as an idea by the former Liberal Premier Dom Perrottet, but carried through by Labor Premier Chris Minns. What are they saying is the reason behind this? So when Perrottet announced this election promise, he said it was partly motivated by, quote, making it easier and quicker for people, particularly women, to access important prescription medications and treatments. So the government doesn't tend to do things just because it will make our lives easier. They have to have other reasons. And another really important reason that they gave was reducing strain on GPs. Over the last couple of years, the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, RACGP, the peak body for GPs, has really repeatedly flagged GPs are overworked and burnt out.
And we've spoken about that so many times on this podcast before. We've spoken to GPs who are saying, you know, they just don't have enough hours in the day to get the work done.
Exactly. That's on top of the difficulty that lots of TDA readers and listeners have also told us that they've had difficulty finding GPs who bulk bill. They have difficulty getting in to see a doctor when they need to. So that really, you know, it makes sense if GPs are saying we're having trouble getting to see everyone and people are saying we're having trouble getting in to see doctors. So that's also particularly true for people in regional and rural areas. According to a government report last month, people in those areas face a significant shortfall of GPs in the coming years. It's only going to get worse year on year.
Okay, and so then was the logic that if a woman doesn't have to go to her GP every so often to get that script renewed, but rather can do it at the pharmacy, that would free up the GP for other work? Is that what was the logic?
That was the logic, yes, and that it also would make it easier for rural and regional people to, quote, get the help they need without having to drive a long way to see a GP who maybe doesn't have an appointment for 3 weeks.
Yeah, okay. And so those are the reasons why the government of the day and the previous coalition government both thought that this was a good idea. What about the other side? What are some of the downfalls, perhaps, of this sort of policy?
So despite this being pitched as something that will help GPs, the RACGP actually opposed this trial when it was first announced. They suggested there wasn't enough information about how patients would be kept safe. Another peak body, the Australian Medical Association, which represents all doctors, not just GPs, campaigned against the trial, and others like it in other states, saying it, quote, put patients at risk.
I know that one of the other ideas that I'd heard was that, this is also revenue that's then not going to GPs because it's then appointments are drying up, that some GPs are complaining about the fact that they then won't be able to, have those regular appointments that created some sort of revenue for their practices.
So those were some of the concerns about this trial specifically. Of course, we should mention that there are and continue to be concerns about the pill itself.
Yeah.
TDA listeners have told us many times before about things like migraines, hormonal imbalances, or mental ill health that they traced back to taking the pill. New South Wales Health's website notes that low-risk pills, the kind that can be dispensed under this trial that's been made permanent, which can contain, quote, only small amounts of estrogen, have been linked to a low risk of blood clots and stroke.
Okay. And so with all of that said, with, the risks of the pill obviously identified, but also the for and against about this trial, we now know that the government has moved to make it permanent. So what does that mean? If I am someone who tomorrow, Saturday, want to go and get the pill, what does that look like?
So you need to have been taking it for 2 years, and you need to find a pharmacy that has a pharmacist that's taken the government's training to be able to dispense the pill. If someone has been prescribed a certain type of contraception by a doctor, a pharmacist won't be able to change the kind that you're taking.
Okay, so if I have been on a certain pill for a year and a half and I want to change that, I'd still need to go back to the GP to get that script changed.
Yes.
Okay, and so then how often would I then have to go to the GP if not for that scenario?
So every 12 months, once a year, is how often you'd be going back to the GP to renew your overall script. Then when you go to the pharmacist, now that the trial has been made permanent, you'll be paying what the government expects to be around $20 to $30 for a consultation with a pharmacist, and then you'll also be paying for the medication.
What have pharmacists said about this? I think I probably know the answer, but, now knowing as well that they will be paid for that consultation as well, now that the trial is over, what have we heard from the pharmacists themselves? Pharmacists
are in favour of the trial being made permanent. The Pharmaceutical Society of Australia, which is the industry's peak professional body, supported the measure. Its New South Wales president, Luke Kelly, called it, quote, an important step, kind of cementing the role of community pharmacies in providing support to patients.
Now, Lucy, we've been speaking about the pill specifically because, there is this big announcement from tomorrow, but I have read and heard about not just the pill being accessible in these sorts of scenarios. What do we know about the other medications that people can access in this sort of way, going through the pharmacy rather than through a GP?
You're right, the pill is not the only one. Under a similar program, New South Wales pharmacists who've completed a special training can dispense medication for uncomplicated UTIs to women who are 18 to 65 who haven't had one recently.
Interesting.
And under another trial, trained pharmacists can dispense some medications to some people without a prescription for skin conditions including eczema and impetigo.
Okay, and is New South Wales, because I think we've only spoken about New South Wales so far, is that the only state or territory where these trials are taking place?
So across the country, states and territories are undergoing trials or have made these things permanent.
Okay.
In WA, it's women aged 18 to 39 who can get a resupply of the pill without seeing a GP more than once a year. In South Australia, the same applies for those aged 17 to 40. In Tassie, for women aged 16 to 50, if you've taken it for 2 years. In the ACT, there's an ongoing trial for those aged 18 to 35, and a trial in Victoria for those aged 16 to 50 actually wraps up next month. Many of those states also have similar programs for UTIs and skin conditions like New South Wales. Queensland really is leading the charge here. They've got a trial underway allowing pharmacists to prescribe, not just dispense, the pill to women and girls older than 16. The state government said this is aimed at making it easier for women in rural and regional areas to manage their reproductive health. It is still a trial, so we'll have to wait and see what the results are.
Lucy, thank you so much for joining us on today's pod, and thank you for listening to another week of the Daily Aus. We'll be back again with a good news wrap tomorrow, but until then, have a brilliant Friday.